All right, we'll get started. Thanks for coming to this session. I was given a little script to introduce Mr. Byrne, but I just asked him over there, I said, is this right? Is there anything you want me to add? He said, tell him I'm not rich, but I'm handsome. So you can, yeah, you can decide for yourself. My name is David Viker. I'm the regional chief for the refuge system in the Southeast region, and I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Byrne. He's president of Byrne Consulting. It's a conservation-focused consulting firm that specializes in finding solutions to conservation through strategic planning, program reviews, other evaluations, and group facilitation. Prior to forming his own company, Bob spent more than 3 decades in conservation, working for 3 state wildlife agencies, 2 nonprofit organizations, as well as a communications consulting firm that specialized in conservation. Being an avid hunter and angler, Bob shared that he has a deep concern about passing on our hunting heritage to the next generation and our fishing heritage. He's focused much of his recent efforts on this calling. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Bob Byrne. Sort of handsome.
Sort of handsome and humble. How are you today? Have a good lunch? Have a good conference? It's, you know, the energy, the vision, the dedication, we've heard those words many times throughout the last couple days, and you'll probably hear them again through my talk. I won't be, there'll be a lot of common themes that we've had. I didn't see Tom Melius come in, but one of the 3 states that I worked for was in Region 3, so if he wants to count that in his body count, that's okay by me. The talk, and again, I've sort of bounced around a little bit, doing both international work, state-level work, law enforcement, information education, just sort of one step ahead of the law, really. And I have several connections directly to the refuge system. A couple of my more recent projects was that I staffed the original or the initial care group that you heard a little bit about this morning. When we started that in 1996, and for the first 7 years up through the centennial, the Wildlife Management Institute, who I was working for at that time, really housed that effort and kept that group going. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. I was also involved as a consultant on the refuge lawsuit, the hunting lawsuit that was just recently ruled on. And at least my speech is that I had the honor and privilege of reading 60 environmental assessments and making sense of those for the court system. And the bottom line there, and we had to do that in about 6 weeks as well, so there were a few late nights involved and there were no weekends, at least not in my life. And the really important thing there is that we won. And you guys did a great job of doing those environmental assessments to make sure that we had the cumulative impacts that were being questioned. And then lastly, and more recently, in another somewhat painful process, was I was involved with reviewing the information collection process and looking at all of the permits that are issued at the refuge level to make sure that they meet the standards for OMB. And I'm sure that was the highest priority in your life, because that's what everybody wakes up to, is to worry about government forms. And another rather painful process. I'm glad it's behind me, but I'm also glad to have it on my resume. I can't quite see everybody, but a little audience poll, if you could. How many have hunting programs on your station? Roughly 80%, maybe 90%. That's great. How many of you have fishing programs on your program? Probably a little less than that, maybe half. How many of you are personally hunters? Again, pretty high percentage, 80% or more. How many of you are personally anglers? Again, almost 80, maybe 90%. How many of you care about conservation? Yeah, that's it. That is the common bond. And I'm surprised that we had that high a percentage on some of those. And that concern about conservation is that common bond that we all share, and we share that amongst a whole host of other groups. But reinforcing that bond and building upon it is obviously critical for us as we move forward. And it cannot be underestimated, should not be underestimated, because as we discuss the future of the wildlife or refuge system, that bond of conservation, that core value, is the thing that will not only drive us, but will drive the participants and the acceptance of what we do among the public at large. And in fact, many of the discussions that we have today are in many ways a microcosm of conservation in the future. It is indeed, these themes that we're talking about will indeed carry over into discussion in other places on other issues, but they're still having a common theme about them, about how whatever organization you are going to fit and meet this conservation agenda in the future, and what is your role in meeting that conservation agenda in the future. Obviously, and it should come as no surprise, and many people have talked about it already, that the near future is going to be a difficult time for our community. We have fiscal issues that we have to address amongst everyone else. But even more importantly, and probably more fearfully, is that there is a belief, and probably a growing belief, that among some segments of society, that protecting our environment is bad for business and therefore bad for America. And that sort of statement, that they even utter that statement, to me is both alarming, but it also sets a benchmark of how much work we actually have to do. We really have to roll up our sleeves and continue the work that we have done. So you ask, well, where's he going? How does this really relate to hunting and fishing programs? And more importantly, why is it important for you as refuge managers to create and have and expand hunting and fishing programs on refuges? And you all seem to be doing that. And the answer really clearly is quite simple. It will create more conservationists. And I know all of you have high priorities, a whole list of things to do, probably more than what you can get done in a day, a week, a month, or even a year. But moving, establishing and expanding these programs forward and higher on your agenda will pay off in creating those conservationists of the future. It's not the only pathway, but it's an important pathway. And part of that importance, not only is there a financial incentive for anglers and hunters to, or for you, because anglers and hunters are contributing financially to that, but they're also contributing to the political dialogue. And more importantly, I think, and most importantly, is that they have real-world connections to both places and people. And those tangible connections will help us tell a better story. And when we tell better stories, we can compete better for the resources and the attention of the public. And that will help us advance our own agenda. If you will indulge me a bit, and I think it's another theme in the conference, but I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I became an angler first and then a hunter. And for those of you who know me, and I know several of you out there, you know that I'm pretty hardcore hunter and angler, and that's pretty much how I define myself and how I define my life. When I was about 6 years old, my grandpa came to visit during one summer. He lived in the Midwest, and we lived on the East Coast, so these visits were relatively rare. And up until that time, I can't say that I really had much interest in hunting, angling, fishing. Of course, I was only 6, so I didn't have a lot of world experience. But nonetheless, my grandfather thought this was important, and he arrived with some cane poles, and so off we went on this adventure down by a nearby river. While my grandpa took my brother and I fishing, I know now that it was much more than that. As we hiked along the bank, we would stop every once in a while, and he would explain how the currents would move through the river and how fish related to those currents and what fish ate and where we would expect to find fish. After a short hike, we found a down log where the current swept underneath it, and he told us that that would be a pretty good spot to try our luck. But before we went to that, before we wetted the line, he demonstrated how to rig it. He didn't do it for us. He showed us how. And he let us do it, painfully, I can assure on his part, how to perform these tasks. We practiced a few casts, flipping again with his cane pole out. In fact, he shortened the cane poles to make them fit our size. We learned to tie on hooks. We learned to bait the hook. And after some minimum level of practice and training, we approached that log, and I flipped out my bobber and worm. And I can honestly say that on my very first cast, I caught my very first fish. I can also tell you that my fishing success has gone downhill significantly since that time. My brother caught a fish shortly thereafter, and of course, being rivals, he insisted that he caught his fish on his first cast, and we have had an argument ever since about whether that is true or not. Mine was a smallmouth bass. I can vividly remember the red eye and the green bars, and vividly remember that. And my brother's was a goggle eye, a completely different species, completely different form, but yet these fish fascinated both of us, and we were hooked. The size of the fish didn't matter, and I don't have the glory picture like Evan had earlier today of this monstrous fish, but those were trophies in my mind, and they were really a way to connect myself to this place. And pretty soon, as we worked through this process, we left that spot, we caught a couple fish, and then we moved on upstream and tried some others. And my grandfather insisted that we select the spots, and we'd have this little conference about why and why we chose this and what we expected. And the fish evaluated us very quickly, or not. But we did have some modest success, and we did actually provide a modest meal for our family. And that set us on a path. And each of you have a similar story. Someone out there gave you this gift. Somebody sparked this passion that brought you here today. And you have an opportunity to pass that on today. And that really is the critical element. While we were fishing, my grandpa taught, not only did he give me encouragement about technique and helped us out, but he also talked about clean water and the value that has, about the value and the obligations you have about putting back and not taking everything out. And he talked about something called conservation. I'm sure I didn't fully grasp that concept, but I knew it was important. And again, that's what we have at stake, and that's the opportunity we have before us. I'm pretty sure now, more than 50 years later, I can take any one of you to within a few feet of where this all unfolded. It's that vivid in my mind, and I know precisely where that is, and I'm sure the environment has changed, but I can tell you where that is. And again, I'm sure there are seminal moments in your mind that you can reel back those memories and say, that was a critical element in my life. The initial training was followed by what we would probably term today distance learning. And that came in the form of letters, real written letters, you remember those? Magazines, phone calls. So this training I got was not a one-day wonder. It was an ongoing mentoring process, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. But I consider that day to be the day that I received the greatest gift I've ever gotten. It has clearly shaped my life and shaped my career and has influenced me and allowed me to come here. And each of you have a similar path along that way. Regrettably, I never had a chance to hunt with my grandfather, but he told me wonderful stories about wild places and wild adventures, and I couldn't wait. I was probably a little savage and just waiting to get out, and I did. And so I've had a chance to travel around, literally around the world, and hunt and fish in very wild places and wonderful places. And that was my motivation. And again, I think you have the possibility, the potential, and you actually are doing it, to give that gift to someone else. As an aside, I've sort of started a personal campaign or a crusade to encourage anyone who currently hunt or fish and try to instill in them that they actually have a social obligation to pass that gift on and give it to someone else just as it was given to them. That's a personal obligation. When you accepted it, that's an unsaid obligation that you took on as well. If you do not personally hunt and fish, and there aren't very many of you here, which I'm very pleased to say, you still have the opportunity to pass on these rich connections to the natural world because of where you are and where you're positioned. And I believe that while times have changed and people are wired and people are networked together and they're busy doing all kinds of other things, we have a product to sell that if we can create an opportunity, there are thousands of people out there willing to accept that training and to get that training and become participants. We just have to set the stage to do that for them. And I understand there's diversity issues and urbanization issues and time issues and stranger dangers and all of those other things, but we just have to be smarter than that. The times are different, and so we have to develop different strategies to get there. And the numbers support this. During the last 5 years, angling visits on refuges specifically have increased an estimated of 1.1 million visitors. That's more than 7 million visitors annually for angling alone. This is an 18% increase. 18% in 5 years. Those are pretty good numbers. Hunting has increased by about 130,000 days during that same time period. About 2.4 million people come to refuges to hunt. That represents approximately 5% increase over the last 5 years. And as you know more than I, hunting opportunities are often limited by limited entries, quota hunts, and things like that. So those numbers are actually even more impressive. During that same time frame, state license numbers have generally stayed pretty flat. There are some ups and downs, but that number has not really changed a whole lot. Roughly about 14.5 million paid license holders. Today, there are approximately 320 refuges open to hunting, and approximately 270 are open to fishing. In the last 15 years, and I didn't do the math, but I'm going to guess, that probably represents a 30% increase in the last 15 years. That, again, is a pretty good number. You're doing the job. But I think there are also opportunities to do better. Just last week, the service announced that 8 refuges are expanding their hunting opportunities. One is being opened for the first time, and another one is being open to fishing for the first time. And if any of the staffs of those refuges, and you would know who you are here, I certainly want to congratulate you for moving ahead with these new opportunities. I know it's not easy to put together those administrative packages necessary to put in and create hunting and fishing programs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And again, as good as those numbers are, I think we can and should do better. As John Kennedy this morning referenced, Recommendation 17 in the new vision document specifically states the service will conduct a review of its current hunting and fishing opportunities, especially opportunities currently offered for youth and people with disabilities. Based on that review, the service will work cooperatively with state fish and wildlife agencies to prepare a strategy for increasing quality hunting and fishing opportunities on National Wildlife Refuge. I commend the drafters of this vision document to including this very actionable item and urge each of you, and I think based on my informal survey, that you will each fully embrace it and get involved. The refuge vision document also states that the refuge system has a steadfast commitment to and a long-standing conservation partnership with America's hunters and anglers. That is a very clear and powerful statement that reaffirms the importance of this conservation-based partnership. And again, to congratulate the service for making this reaffirmation as part of the document. In my case, as I've already expressed, that fateful day when my grandpa took me fishing altered my life. I've learned about trees and flowers and environment and invasive species and invasive worms and a whole host of other things. And I have been very blessed to have a career in this and apply this passion to conservation. Life's good. It's good for you, I think, and I think it's good for everyone out there who certainly hunts and fishes. An important part of the success of that day, as I alluded to, is that we were not just taken fishing, but we were taught how to fish. That is a huge difference. And the difference between those two, I think, is critical, and I hope you integrate that into your programs. The success of your program should not be measured on how many smiling faces that you crank through, but rather they should be on how well you transfer the skills, knowledge, attitudes, and confidence necessary for your participants so that they can go on a path to pursue these activities on their own. This path ideally should include a full array of educational skill development activities that preclude the actual event. So you have pre-event activities as well as advanced activities where people can come back later at a later date to improve their skills and understanding. This becoming an angler or a fisherman is a process, and you know this because you're part of that. And we need to understand where we are in that process and how we fit into that. And please do not interpret this as being narrowly focused on an effort to cater to hunters and anglers. It really is not. It's really called to encourage you to integrate hunting and fishing into all of your programs and all your programs into hunting and fishing. And you're perfectly positioned, in fact, uniquely positioned to do so. I can think of very few or almost none places or situations where hunting and fishing activities are taking place in the same venue as environmental education, interpretation, wildlife observation, and wildlife photography. For example, adding a small section on, for lack of a better title, bass biology for anglers into your existing aquatic education or interpretive programs has the potential of doing two things. One, making a non-angling participant of that program aware of your hunting programs, but it also has the potential of making the people who are a part of your angling program more aware of the biology and making them more successful. In either case, or in both cases, we have the opportunity to, again, expand that conservation connection that we need so vitally in order to be relevant in the future. And again, that's the kind of thinking that we need to take this to the next level. In a similar vein, wildlife observation programs should not be just about watching birds, but they rather should focus on improving a person's observational skills at all levels, so that when they walk by a buck rub or coyote scout, they will see it. And the more they see, The clearer they see, the small things that they see, the more questions that they will ask and the greater connections they will have and the greater opportunities we will have to talk about things like food chains, wildlife management, population dynamics, the role of hunting and fishing and conservation. So those connections we have to be innovative about and see where we can make them happen in a broad array of programs so that these are not stovepiped but truly integrated into a whole host of programs. It won't be easy, but I know you can do it. You've faced much more difficult challenges. The refuge vision document also characterizes refuges as laboratories for partnership and adaptive management. I would also add that these are lands where they're laboratories for strengthening and conservation collaboration across all of the wildlife-dependent activities. As you know, wildlife recreation is dependent upon good wildlife management. And one of the important roles that I think that refuges can play is that they are a place where recreationalists share a common place, a common connection to land, but they also share this common resource or resources. And by sharing these resources, there's an opportunity for us to help them understand the shared values that they have, and they understand the shared connection and the conservation core beliefs that they have. This 80-20 rule, we agree, within various environmental groups, 80% of the time, let's focus on that and let's leverage that so that we can reduce the noise that the 20% has, because we need to be more powerful. We have some enemies out there or some challenges ahead of us that don't think what we do is important, and we need every ally that we can have. As I said earlier, one of my highlights in my career is working with the Cooperative Alliance for Refuge Enhancement. You may know it as the CARE Group. I can assure you during the early days, the first probably 6 to 8 months, there were some bumps in the road in keeping all those groups together. My boss at that time, Raleigh Sparrow, and many of you may know him, and I had to travel to several groups to keep them on board and to convince them that the value of collaborative conservation and cooperation was more important than them going off on their own, and to check that 20% at the door. And let's focus on what's important, because if CARE wins, if refuges win, then we all win. And I think that is a critical or another opportunity for us as well. And the National Wildlife Refuge Association has done a remarkable job of keeping that together. I had the benefit of having the centennial as a goal where people would say, that's where we want to be. Without a centennial, that group has stayed together is both remarkable and expanded is remarkable. And that goes to show about, or really reinforces that core conservation values that I'm talking about. Strengthening your hunting and fishing programs among all of your other programs, I believe, has the opportunity to strengthen your friends groups as well. The ultimate goal, or one of the ultimate goals, I hope, in your friends group is to have the diversity or mirror the diversity that the national CARE groups have, where we have some pretty folks on both sides of that spectrum. And when you have and create opportunities for people to interact as people rather than as organizations, and I think once you get out of the Washington, D.C. area, you have a greater opportunity to do that, because the politics and the fundraising and the competition is not there. They're people at your refuges, and orchestrating situations where they get together and know each other and share those values, I think, will help. Some of you, I think many of you, are probably well down this path, but I suspect more work needs to be done. When you're creating these hunting and fishing programs, specific requests for assistance should not be limited by the normal roles that you perceive people to have. Don't put them in boxes. I would strongly suggest that you try and find places for people, for people that are non-hunters. They may be bird watchers. Well, what do you do in the duck blind most of the time? You bird watch. And so that a bird watcher may be a pretty good ally to teach about bird watching in a waterfowl hunting course. And a waterfowl hunter may be a good ally to teach about bird watching in a wildlife observation course. And the more we can cross-mingle in that regard, I think the better off we will be in really forming a true, cohesive conservation alliance. In fact, as an aside, the budget discussions that we're having, I look at as a real opportunity. All of the conservation groups are struggling for their programs. And when they struggle, maybe they will put some of their issues aside that have kept them away from each other, and that they can find common alliances and common ground. Last week, a letter went to the Hill with 600 organizations on there. And many of those organizations have never signed letters with each other before. And that is a positive and very powerful thing. And again, the opportunity for integrating these various groups is only limited by your imagination and your ability to pull together the right people for the right purpose, and that right purpose is conservation. Luckily, you do not have to do this alone. I don't know what that was. The numerous state agencies have or are developing hunting and angler recruitment programs. They are networked with various NGOs and conservation organizations to provide guidance for program support. Additional assistance from national groups like the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation or the newly created Council to Advance Hunting and Shooting Sports that is just ramping up are available, and these folks are connected, and you need to be connected with them. We again leveraging those opportunities. As mentioned earlier, your youth programs, if you're going to focus on youth, should be more than just a guided experience where a person takes a person out. And earlier today and at other times we've talked about the role of mentoring. And mentoring is often used as a model for how to develop programs. And the definition of a mentor is a trusted friend, counselor, or teacher who provides expertise to less experienced individuals to help them advance. And that's the operative word, to help them advance. Establishing pathways for participants to develop more skills and the interest that goes in with that is important for that advancement to take place. In order to do that, they really need to be participant-driven. And so that the program is designed to meet the needs of the participant. And then to do that, you really have to ask them. So not only what did you like or did you have a good time, but what else do you need to know in order for you to advance and take the next level and to be confident to go do this on your own. And then you can develop the program the next step to do that, and you can integrate that learning into your program so you have a self-feedback mechanism so that you are providing for the needs of the participants so that you can launch them on their own. It goes without saying that whenever possible, programs should be expanded to include families, not just youth. The more we get involved with the families, especially for youth, because it's the parents negotiating with their children that determine their recreational choices. And so if we can hook the students and the mother and father and the brothers and sisters, that will pay big dividends. The skills, knowledge, attitudes, and confidence that you transfer to your participants are the true outcomes of the program. Revising your current programs and developing advanced programs will require some thoughtful planning about what specific outcomes you want. Again, I would talk to students beforehand and say, what do you need to know? It's not what we want to tell them, but it's what do they need to know. They are hungry for this knowledge. We have it, but we just need to figure out how to make that connection. In doing so, obviously the program or the participants will advance, but your programs will become more effective. And that, again, helps you tell better stories, and better stories help you compete for more funding. And that really is the game that we play. Again, having numbers of participants will mean very little. I mean, it has some impact. But if you compare numbers with outcomes about skills that they've transferred, or even more importantly, attitudes that you've been able to transfer, then success is assured. While we may want to focus on youth and maybe people with disabilities, as recommendation 17 alludes, we should not ignore current hunters or current participants, or I think probably the most important group is actually young adults, the millenniums as they are described, Generation Y. On a national level, roughly 1/3 of current hunters, and I don't have the numbers for fishermen, started hunting after they were age 20. 1/3 started after they were age 20. So while we can't ignore the youth, that's 2/3 of our entrance levels or our future participants, 1/3 of them can be captured at a later date. I know, just as another aside, I took 3 people, 3 young adults, all 3 recent college graduates, never hunted before in their life, all sons of current hunters, recently graduated from college, and all suddenly decided that they wanted to learn how to hunt. So we took them turkey hunting this year. They had a grand time. They made lots of mistakes, and we didn't kill birds, but they're hooked. In 2 weeks, we will be setting up tree stands on my farm, and they will be able to scout out and start anticipating this hunting season, and they will probably shoot a little bit and do all of those anticipatory preparation kinds of things that really get them reeled in and become long-term participants. These young adults not only will provide a more immediate return on your investment because they have money, they are mobile, they make their own recreational choices, and they are more diverse in their own right. Diversifying participants in hunting and angling programs is an issue that we all have talked about, but I think it will be easier if we look at the workplace as the entrance level rather than trying to replicate ourselves. The workplace is already diversified, and if we can get a foothold by some advocate in there and they come in and say, wow, we had a great time this weekend, this is what I did, and now they start that spark going on, all of a sudden they can help create and recruit a more diverse audience than what we currently are. And unfortunately, and I hate and jokingly and still hate to say it, not too many folks, not too many young folks want to be old white guys. And that's who we are, at least on the hunting side. I think I'm cool, but they don't. And so we need to figure out how to transfer that to a level and integrate that into their psyche and let them be cool. And we can do that. They just need the knowledge and skills and attitudes that we can give them. And then we can step back and let them go to work. Research has also indicated that virtually all activities have an adoption sequence that includes awareness, interest, trial, continuation with support, and then finally continuation without support. Almost everything goes that way. And your programs need to be aware of where they fit in this continuum and where they can potentially fit. thinking about this process and developing regular ongoing activities that specifically target continuation with support and particularly continuation without support will help you advance and help you become more successful. And if you actually did, if I did an analysis of your programs, and I have on other programs, I suspect that your programs do well on the awareness, well on the interest, well on the trial, and then nothing. And so we need to bridge that gap to where they have continuation. We have to provide advanced opportunities in a less mentored way, but still in a mentored way. I know, again, you have programs out there that are currently doing this, and I congratulate you on your efforts and your forward thinking. And for those who are doing this, I would really ask you to share your expertise and your experience with your colleagues. We need all the help we can get. For those who are not hunting or hunters, or maybe have a staff a person on your staff that is not a hunter, there is a new program sponsored by the Wildlife Management Institute, the McGraw Wildlife Foundation, and the the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, called Conservation Leaders for Tomorrow. This course will be offered at the National Conservation Training Center, and it teaches people about hunting. It's not a recruitment program, but it teaches people about hunting and, to a lesser degree, fishing. We're starting to integrate fishing into that as well. It's a week-long program. It will be offered for the first time at NCTC in January 2012, and I encourage you to look into this training so that, well, I think most of you have a pretty good handle on the benefits of hunting and fishing, but if you have staffs that will be moving into programs where they are going to manage these programs, they need this training. They need to understand how this conservation connection benefits not only their refuge, but the politics of it, the culture of it, and so I would urge you again to take a look at that program. As mentioned earlier, there is a pretty large administrative burden that you all know better than I, that is you have to go through before you can open hunting and fishing programs on refuges. This burden is largely defined in the Refuge Improvement Act, so statutorily there's not a lot we can do about that. However, it can be somewhat lessened by using contractors, and I'm a contractor, but I'm not really looking for work. And contractors can process permits for you. There are ways to do that. There are technologies available to make it a little bit easier. They can indeed draft some of or help you draft some of the necessary environmental documents. And state wildlife agencies obviously are another partner that can help you do that, and particularly supplying the numbers of some of the environmental impacts, both direct and indirect and cumulative impacts that you have to include in those documents. And there are numerous templates, and you know this as well, that these documents exist out there, and you can borrow from various other ones that have already been completed. They still need to be tailored to your situation. I know one of the things that in the refuge lawsuit that they focused quite a bit on was that there was not a great diversity in these EAs that people were writing, and so they said there was not as much of a hard look as necessary. The judge didn't buy that argument, but nonetheless you need to be conscious of it so that you are actually looking at the environmental assessments or the potential impacts on your refuge. The point is that you really don't have to develop these documents from scratch. Help is available for you to do so. In addition, I would suggest that you look at and review your own administrative processes that you have established to make sure you have not artificially created barriers for both yourself or your participants. I know there's some check-in, check-out processes out there, some of which, when I looked at them, I had to question and say, is that really necessary? Do they really need to jump through that kind of hoop? So I would strongly suggest that you look at that, and again, look at the opportunity for technology to help you. There are some refuges that are using e-applications online. State applications are doing that. E-check-ins where they can actually check in. I don't think anybody's got a mobile app for that, but I suspect it's coming. And e-harvest reporting so that you don't have to have the manpower, you don't have to have the burden that you're only open so these days and these hours, and again, be more flexible for our current society. Again, the recent resolution of the hunting lawsuit has removed some of the uncertainty to that process. In fact, it has removed a lot of that uncertainty. And part of that, the new openings that we've had is a reflection of the resolution of that lawsuit. That we, for several years, there was really a moratorium on any openings simply because we didn't know what the judge was going to rule, and we didn't want to anger the judge or have any kind of negative kind of thing or trying to think that we're trying to go around him. So we waited until that ruling took place. It took them almost 8 years to make it, so there was a backlog out there. And hopefully that uncertainty will translate into a speedier process for refuges who are looking to expand or open new or expand existing opportunities. For those of you who are involved in this process, I urge you to keep pushing ahead. Again, the ultimate goal is to create this new conservation. And that point brings me back to the beginning, and that the biggest reason to hold and expand these programs is to help create one segment of the next generation of conservationists. You clearly have the ability to host, coordinate, and facilitate the creation of those activities. However, I'm actually asking you to do more. I hope that you embrace your potential and become a passionate enabler, to be that spark plug, to pass on this, to be the innovative thinker, to figure out how to become and develop advanced programs and needs-based from your participants and meet their needs so that these skills, knowledge, and conservation attitudes are passed on to people. And each of you occupy that critical position that and can do more than just host a hunt. You have the potential, like my grandfather, to be the person who can give someone else this greatest gift. I hope you will embrace that, and I hope you take that challenge and help create that next generation of not only hunters and anglers, but also help create the next generation of conservation advocates. Thank you for attending, and thank you again for all you do.
Bob's got about 10 minutes. We can take some questions or comments.
Sure. We need a microphone because we are streaming this.
Doug Alcorn, ARD of Mike Birds in Alaska.
Yeah, Bob, you and I go back when I used to work for the Sport Fishing and Boating Partnership Council in D.C., and back in the day, in the late 90s, PETA was kind of mounting a big effort nationally to oppose recreational fishing and hunting, and I'm wondering, I've been out of the D.C. limelight for over a decade now, I'm wondering if they are gaining momentum or if they've sort of been minimalized over this debate.
Well, I would never minimalize PETA's long-term goal, but they haven't really been active, and on one hand that's good news, and the other hand it's bad news because we don't know what they're up to. So I would be vigilant. I know the recreational fishing discussion about that kind of issue, the humaneness and animal rights issue, is taking greater hold in Europe than it is here. And so sometimes they bounce around. They get a foothold over someplace else, and then they bring it over here, and they learn something there, and then they try it here. I haven't seen any evidence of that recently, but like I said, I'm always cautious.
Microphones, because we're streaming live. Paul Schmidt, former Assistant Director of Fish and Wildlife and a high-ranking official at DU.
Hi, Bob. In the recommendation 17, it actually speaks to quality hunting and fishing. And I'd like you to talk about that. Frankly, I'm going to give you my perspective. It's a very loaded word because I believe that quality is definitely in the eyes of the beholder. And I'm not sure how we get consistency across the Fish and Wildlife Service and National Wildlife Refuge System associated with that word quality. To me, it may be a full bag limit, or it may be not seeing anyone out there or hearing another shot, or it may be you pick it. I mean, I'm sure there are any number of ways you could define it. I'm a little concerned.
Good question, and I think the refuge system is actually a little ahead of you on that, and that term is actually defined in policy, and it's pretty generic. I think I actually have it over in my hotel room. I brought it because I figured somebody was going to ask that question and then promptly forgot it this morning. It has something to do with age, I think. But nonetheless, I think it's 605 F1 or FM1, and it does indeed define quality, and quality talks about safety, talks about legal, it talks about not substantially interfering with other recreational opportunities. So it's not, while clearly the subjectiveness could be there, A, it's never been applied that way, and B, that threshold is really common sense threshold. It's not that kind of thing where 6 ducks is quality and 5 is not. Though that it doesn't speak to that. And so, at least as far as I can tell, in the refuge programs that I've looked at, it's not been an issue. Sure.
Yeah, and if you could, Paul, you mentioned too consistency, and you I guess said that maybe consistency was important across the system. Could you address what you meant on that?
I could if after I follow up with this one point, and that is, so I was aware of that being sort of defined in other places, so I can assume that in that recommendation that kind of definition will be used for that recommendation.
I would assume that that is the case, but again, how that review is going forward, what is included, who's going to do it, what the time frames are, who's going to be involved, I think all is yet to be decided. That brings up a point that if you have a concern about that, not so much, I think the real issue is that you need to make sure that the service follows through on that recommendation, conducts that review, and does it in a comprehensive manner that you're comfortable with. And so that,
and if it happens that way, frankly, it answers David's question to me, and that is that in that light of an assessment and using that limited definition of quality, then you get at least some amount of consistency, while I think individual areas are going to take on the character of a particular area, so not that kind of consistency.
Yeah, and let me add, when that definition or when that policy was developed, the state wildlife agencies were actively involved in it. It was a public policy, or public participation process. I want to say that it started maybe in 1999 or 98. It went through one review, and then they actually did it a second time. So the community had 2 bites at that policy and those definitions, and it was finalized in 2006. I would think that policy would be at least looked at and say, is this still the standard we want? And if not, do we need to change it? But I suspect that because of the initial review that it's had, it won't go there. I mean, it won't need to be updated, and that indeed will be applied to that, I won't say standard, but it will be used to guide the programs in the future. But that's Bob Byrne Consulting, not Fish and Wildlife Service. I don't speak for them. So.
Thank you, Bob. I'd love to hear a comment or question from a field biologist or field manager.
Paul, I was there when they were writing those wildlife-dependent recreation policies and the hunting policies, and there was a group of state fish and wildlife agencies at the table, and they wrestled with that. The original language was high quality, and there were so many discussions on that, on what that meant. Part of the discussion was They wanted to have refuge. They didn't want the refuge system to be perceived as a higher quality than state wildlife areas, and the refuge system did want to have some sort of measure of not just being overrun or unlimited entry. So there was lots of discussion. I'm not happy with the way the policies came out in the end. For me, I think Bob hit it when over-regulation on measuring when you're going in and out of a refuge may not be necessary in a lot of instances. And as a hunter from age 6 on, I often choose not to hunt on refuges because that's quality to me, is being able to come and go as I please and experience the environment. But that quality issue does have a definition, and it is pretty generic, and but it is consistent. I'm Tom Reed. I'm the project leader in Western Montana at Lee Metcalf Refuge.
Other folks, questions or comments? Let's hear it one more time for Bob Byrne, please.
Thank you all.